Hi, this is Liv Morgan, and you are listening to No One Knows, a deep dive podcast into the mysterious death of JoAnn Matouk Romain. Okay. Hi, guys, it's Liv here, and I have a special guest with me. I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are.
Sure. My name is Steven Thiels, and I'm married to my wife, Zoe Hollis, and we own Holiday Heating, a heating and cooling and boiler business in Grosse Pointe, in the Grosse Pointes.
Cool. Okay. So you and I have connected before, just a couple days ago, but we connected in regards to, I had told you a few people had sent me your name.
Yes, that does not surprise me.
A few people for a little while, they've been sending me your name and saying, this is the individual you should talk to. You need to talk to him. He's very well versed in the injustice system within the Grosse Pointes. So of course through the grapevine, I got connected to you, and
Yes, I've had a lot of experiences with with Dan Jensen Sr., the former chief of police.
okay. So yeah, let's start there. Let's just, kind of lay out for everybody, where we're at, how we got here, what's going on, and then the type of injustices you've dealt with specifically within this area.
Sure. So I knew the Jensen family growing up. We went to school together, and to be honest, did not have much of an opinion about them. They seemed all right to me, I guess. But then, as I got older, my ex-wife had married um, one of Dan Jensen Sr.'s children.
Okay.
And that's when I started to have a lot of interactions with Chief of Police at the time, Dan Jensen.
Okay, perfect. And that started obviously because you and your ex-wife now, split up, and then what kind of consumed from that?
Correct. So originally, I think he was just trying to, I don't know, intimidate me.
Junior?
Senior.
Senior, okay.
Senior, I think he was just trying to intimidate me, but it quickly escalated into my belief is he is trying to have me charged or convicted of any kind of crime uh, as a means to um, sabotage child custody.
Okay.
I believe that's the goal.
So all of this has to do with a child that you share with your ex-wife.
Correct. So
Okay.
if you look at this through the lens of this is all about child custody, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. So yeah, give me a little bit of synopsis on where we're at with everything.
Oh boy, that's a tall
How
order.
many years we're in?
Well, I'm pleased to announce that after 5 years of pending trial for stalking Dan Jensen Jr. and his wife, the charges have been dropped.
Awesome. That's good.
So that was huge, but it was really a long road because, every few words out of the chief's mouth was that Steven Thiels has pending charges, and he's a bad guy, when in reality they were fabricated charges.
Okay. And all of this was to falsify and make you look a part that they wanted you to look in the eyes of the court and judicial system to ultimately affect your parenting time.
Yeah, parenting time in custody. Yes, yeah. It never looks good going into a custody hearing with serious criminal charges pending against you, and certainly not convictions.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's start back. Let's start on a few instances that you've had. I know when we first connected, we talked about, you'd sent me some videos, and we were kind of looking at some alarming things. So I'll let you kind of take the floor. This is your story to tell.
Sure. So what I want to focus on is less about, what I think and what I believe I know, and more about things that are verifiable. There's documents, there's videos, there's ways that people can confirm what I'm saying. So I'm not asking anybody to take my word for it. You can, see for yourself.
I love that.
So one of the first experiences I had where I started to realize exactly what Dan Jensen, chief of police, was up to. Was he had had one of his family members lure me to pick up my daughter, actually. So I was told that if I wanted to see my daughter, I had to go to a specific location. And what I did not know is that he had falsified documents to have me charged, or not charged, excuse me, falsified documents so he could get a personal protection order against me.
Mm-hmm.
So with this personal protection order, I was barred from going to his son's house. But then, like I said, I was lured to that property, and there's a police report in Grosse Pointe Woods from 2019 where it states that Dan Jensen Sr. called Grosse Pointe Woods and told them that I would be picking up my daughter at a specific time, and that that's where they could find me, and that I would be in violation of a personal protection order if I did go to that location. So what had happened was the Wayne County Sheriff that was tasked with serving me actually called me. So although I had not been served yet, he called me and told me what was going on. So I was aware that there was a personal protection order.
But you had not physically been served yet.
I had not physically been served yet, correct.
Okay.
But sure enough, so as I looked up the requirements, it said I had to stay 500 feet away. Mm-hmm. So I looked on Google Maps. I found out what 500 feet away from the pickup location was supposed to be. And I went and I stood about 550 feet away from where the pickup location was.
Smart man.
Yeah, it was well thought out, and was not sure that that this was a full setup. But as my mom was driving at the time, as we drove past the Grosse Pointe Woods police, we realized that I was wrong, and as usual, Mom was right. And they ripped me out of the front of my car, my mother's car, and took my seatbelt off and arrested me, and accused me of violating a personal protection order.
After you were asked to come to get your daughter?
After I was asked to come get my daughter.
And the original call was made by Jensen Sr.?
Jensen Sr., correct. And so after that, what I had done was I had filed a complaint with Michigan State Police for...
Sorry, I don't mean to chuckle.
Well, I actually, this was interesting. It gave me false hope because I was able to initiate an investigation against Chief Jensen instantly. When the lien department at the state of Michigan State Police, when they looked at my lien history, they said it is 10 times longer. The amount of times people have looked my name up is 10 times longer than what they're accustomed to seeing. So, this isn't the first issue with lien systems within the Grosse Pointe communities.
I mean, for those of you that are listening to the podcast, you know, JoAnn's lien, it wasn't her lien ran on the vehicle. There was time discrepancies. They were running liens when they shouldn't have been. A huge time discrepancy within JoAnn's going missing. So here we have another instance where they're running liens on your vehicle, which you cannot do that unless you have a reason as to why you are running somebody's lien, whether that be a traffic stop, traffic violation, something along those lines. But
correct.
Obviously, because your ex-wife is now married to the chief's son, now we have some, let's say, I don't know, wiggle room for them to where they're kind of doing things outside of norms.
Correct, and the police are very adept at creating a circumstance where they can argue it was a legitimate lien run. And then also I've learned that the Clemis system is, and also a system referred to as Talon. Those are some other areas where they're able to look up records and circumvent the audit trail, it's called. So whenever someone looks up a record, there's a audit trail created. So you can, for example, recently we got an audit trail from Ferndale for my name, and we could see all the reports that were pulled regarding me.
And that's basically like the backlog of what the police are doing.
Exactly.
On their computers, during their lien system, during all of that.
Exactly, right. And so they're basically using that lien system illegally so they can, locate people or find out, whatever circumstances are going on so they can use that to their advantage.
So what ended up happening after you went to Michigan State Police, and when did you go to Michigan State Police?
I went to Michigan State Police in 2019, and a Detective Lambert investigated the case, And then through a few subpoenas, I also found that Jensen Jr. was inquiring with John Alcorn, the now chief of police in Grosse Pointe City, and asking him to inquire about the investigation and report back to him. So Jensen Jr. is asking the other chief of police of Grosse Pointe City basically to divulge, details about an ongoing investigation.
Okay, because obviously Senior Jensen was no longer the chief at that point, or
No,
he was.
He was still the chief. I think that Jensen Sr. was trying to create a little bit of a he was trying to create a little bit of a distance from
Okay.
inquiring himself. So he had his son inquire through
Okay, that makes sense.
John Alcorn of Grosse Pointe City.
Okay. And so Michigan State Police basically said what?
They eventually said nothing, just that they couldn't find anything improper, but they also could not share any of the records with me. It was just kind of a wholesale, that was the end of the investigation.
Which you guys are familiar with JoAnn's case. It was very similar when they went to Michigan State Police.
Correct.
It was, they spoke with an investigator and then all of a sudden it was cut. Same similarities, same people, which is why we've also connected here. But the biggest thing for me is kind of where you're at now. So like you've had a lot to get to this point. So 2019, you're meeting with Michigan State Police. What happens after that? How are we getting to now 2024, almost 2025?
Sure. So yeah, a lot going on. We had a 27-day trial, at which I prevailed, and there's been just endless legal filings, and I've had former Chief Jensen harassing my wife and I, and because of the stalking charges, which again have been dropped, but because of those, I was unable to file a personal protection order for myself against the chief's son and his son's wife. So my wife, Zoe, filed for personal protection orders against both Daniel Jensen Jr. and his wife, and both of those were approved. And then they both, this is kind of interesting, they both hired attorneys to file a motion to terminate a personal protection order. And Dan Jensen Jr.'s wife had a slick-talking riverboat shyster lawyer, and so not the greatest lawyer. He works out of a warehouse. And then Dan Jensen Jr. had some Bobby Ferguson attorneys, so some very high-power attorneys.
For PPOs.
For PPOs, very unusual.
So those PPOs are still in place, though. They were not tossed out.
They were not tossed, but they've expired now, and one of them is still being litigated. But right now, it just expired a few weeks ago, and then we're in the process of renewing it.
Okay, because obviously the PPO kept you safe during that point.
I would actually argue that it did not do a lot to keep us safe.
Okay, so let's divulge some of that.
Let's get into it.
Yeah. Tell me, so I was explaining to people, there's a difference between normal PPOs, ex parte PPOs. I was kind of giving them the rundown of everything, but the biggest thing for me, which is concerning when you're talking about your safety, right? So if you are serving a PPO to somebody, fine, but the person who's getting served can no longer carry a weapon.
Correct.
Which is huge when we're talking about chief of police, ex-chief of police, people that were or are still in law enforcement when you're serving, kind of gets it in this gray area where can they still do their job? Can they not do their job? Because technically if you're served a PPO, you cannot carry a firearm. But I also always say for victims who are being served, so if you guys have ever been served with a PPO, it puts you in a predicament where it could be scary, right? If you're trying to protect yourself, you no longer can because legally you cannot carry a firearm to do so.
Correct. And I think the benefit for the Jensens and Grosse Pointe Farms police in general is they refuse to honor personal protection orders for the Jensen family. So there's been a number of incidents where were followed, were heckled, and were videotaped even by the chief of police himself at the time. Jeez. And nobody will do anything about it. And now the city of Grosse Pointe Farms refuses to accept service. The police department, the city itself accepts service for administrative subpoenas, but the police themselves are refusing to accept service from our attorney.
Okay, and the subpoenas are in regards to what?
The subpoenas are in regards to the personal protection orders. We're trying to force them to provide all the evidence that we know exists because, we lived it.
Yeah.
We saw what happened. You can hear the body cameras when they're running. They make this whistling noise, and they're trying to conceal these search warrants in particular. So the search warrant was, my wife has received death threats via email from Dan Jensen Jr.'s wife, and they filed, they issued search warrants for Google and Yahoo. And the Google account did not have the death threats because I'm sure they were deleted already.
Mm-hmm.
And the Yahoo account did have the death threats in them. So the solution that Detective Wachowski came up with was, I'll just ignore the documents I have showing the death threats. And then he created, a falsified document stating that he believed the death threats were actually photoshopped, like not even emails. They were just simply created strictly with image editing software, and he denied.
But you have proof that it's in your inbox.
Yeah, it's still in the inbox. Like, we have the emails. So now what we're trying to do is prove that he knew that by forcing them to give us the search warrant that they served on Yahoo.
So it's like you have this mainline story, which is what I always tell everybody. Like, you've got the main story, and then you've got all these branches coming off where it's like, this person's corrupt, this person's corrupt, this person's corrupt. And like, they're all trying to cover their tracks. And I was telling you, this isn't the first time where there's issues with subpoenas. I was explaining to you that in JoAnn's case, they actually had to sue them for all the documentation for FOIA. And FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, you're legally allowed to fill out that form anytime you want to get any sort of legal documentation. Police reports, I mean, obviously, important information, proprietary information will be redacted, but
correct.
For the most part, you should be able to get legally. That is your legal right.
And they're required to provide them to you, but it's always, my experience has been, it's always a game to try to hide whatever it is that they don't want you to see. And I really feel for Michelle and her siblings, because it's really consuming financially and consumes a lot of your time, just trying to force the city to follow their most basic obligation to provide the public records.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, let alone from everything else that's going on in this city. But
yeah, it really makes me wonder what Dickinson Wright is doing, because that's the city attorney, and they're supposedly this, top shelf law firm, and they just refuse to. They've got a duty to report, and there's a failure to act on Dickinson Wright's part. They know that the city is not following the FOIA rules. They know that they're required to accept subpoenas, and they just refuse to do so.
I'm curious about the loopholes with that. Like, how can they legally get around that?
Well, it's not legal.
I know, but that's where it's like, okay, so where you were speaking before, where you go to Michigan State Police, and it's like, who holds, this is like the key question for everything, who holds the key for holding Grosse Pointe Farms, Grosse Pointe Woods, Grosse Pointe City accountable, right?
I think you have to file complaints in federal court for civil rights violations, most likely for equal protections. That's one that I've really been focused on, because they have to protect all citizens equally. And I'm sure there's a whole host of other civil rights violations, but I really think the solution is you have to sue them, because the justice system is not set up to hold judges and police accountable immediately. It's set up to hold citizens accountable immediately. If you speed, you get pulled over right away. If you do anything, or in my case, do nothing, the police show up and write tickets, they'll arrest you. But if you're a judge or a police officer, it's very difficult, very, very difficult. And they just seem to do whatever they want. And, yeah.
We were explaining last episode too that there's like this, people need to understand the divide between a police officer and a badge, right? At the end of the day, they're still a human who make human error. And it's one thing if you make an error and you can go back on the things that you did or go back on the things that you said and say, you know what, this was incorrect. This is the correct way we do it. Come back on the things you say. But this divide between, okay, people automatically assume that somebody who has a badge is never going to commit a crime,
Right.
or never going to make a mistake. And that's the thing too, is I don't want people to think, oh, she's a cop hater. No, that's not it. It's the fact at the end of the day that people who hold a position of power, I believe in my heart, should be held to a higher standard. If you are here to protect the people and you speak for a multitude of people who have badges, you are held to a different standard than the regular civilian. And like you just said, we get in trouble right away. You speed, you get pulled over.
Right.
You get a ticket. You go to court. I mean,
yeah,
it should be the same. And I know specifically during my research, I found a lot of complaints from people in the city towards officers. Specifically last week, I was talking about Tim Matouk and some of, I'm like, there's a paper trail leading up to all of this. This isn't just something that came out of thin air,
Right.
And I want to touch on the fact of kind of what specific officers have been doing to you guys through this case.
Sure.
You sent me some videos last night, and they're extremely disturbing.
Right. Yes. So Zelensky is one that really bothers me because him and Officer Herner, they're actually willing to put this in writing, but they obstruct service constantly. And when I say that, in their police reports, they say Steven Thiels' process server was at the location attempting to serve one of the Jensens, and we didn't want that to happen. So we told the process server to leave. We escorted the Jensen family member to their car, and they left. And then the police make sure to note service was not made. And the purpose there is it kneecaps our ability to hold them accountable in court, because we've got the police saying in black and white that service was not made. But simultaneously, they're admitting to a crime, because obstruction of service is a crime. And that's happened at least a dozen times.
And the biggest thing too is when you had sent that video over, I was like, Zelensky. We have talked about him so many times on the podcast in regards to JoAnn's case, and he was like a very key point in a lot of things, but timeline keys, just his willingness to give information. I was explaining to you that during his deposition, I think he said like 100 something times, I don't recall, every time he was asked a specific detail in regards to the things that he was doing. So
yeah, he that does not surprise me. And I want to make clear to everybody that I have no problem with police officers. There's a lot of police officers that I really like, especially Steven Thiel out of Grosse Pointe Park. We have the same name, and he's just the greatest guy. Another shout out to Tom Card. I grew up with him. There's a lot of really great police officers in the Grosse Pointes, and a lot of the officers that I'm having trouble with and that I've noticed the Romain family had trouble with, they're not from Grosse Pointe. They're from other suburbs, and they commute to work here. So that kind of, I just want everyone to remember that this isn't like a Grosse Pointe hating kind of thing. I love Grosse Pointe. I grew up here, and I want to stay here the rest of my life.
Which is crazy to think you still want to stay here, even with everything that has happened.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, it's not, the Grosse Pointe didn't do this to me,
It's the people.
You're right. It's thousands, I go in thousands of homes.
Yeah. People. Yeah. True.
Right. Yeah. I go into thousands of homes every year in Grosse Pointe because of our heating business, and I love my communications with these people, and I see them all over town, everywhere I go, always waving, saying hello. People are constantly honking at me.
It's a very small town feel.
it is a very small town feel.
Which is good and bad in these type of situations, right?
Right. Yeah. There's maybe 20 people I have a problem with throughout the Grosse Pointes, and it's the police officers that are just trying to harass me because I think they're trying to get clout with their superiors. They think like, well, I'm supposed to treat Mr. Thiel like garbage, so if I do that, maybe that'll look good for me, I guess.
And that's, like you said, it's not a cop hating party. It's more so holding these people who have this position of power accountable for the actions and the things that they say and the things that they do. And who's holding them accountable if they're not doing what they should be doing legally?
Right. It's
because
scary.
It's terrifying. And I want you to, if you can, go into detail about the first video that you sent me yesterday.
No, remind me, are you talking about the Be a Man video?
The one where they were outside your house.
Oh, sure. Yes, this one, and I really like these because I feel like Officer Herner and Officer Roden and Rhaegar, Officer Rhaegar. I really like Officer Rhaegar because I can tell he's like a legit cop. He's nice.
You can hear the concern.
Fair, he's asking the right questions, whereas Officer Roden is more excited to like maybe get into some combat. That seems to be his primary focus, not doing the right thing. And then Herner, he was the officer in charge in that fiasco, and he is just trying to, I think, kiss the ring of the Jensens maybe, or I'm not really sure what that arrangement is. But so basically, one of the Jensens tries to run my wife off the road, and she's involved in a high-speed chase in Grosse Pointe, which this is all on, there's a 911 call that if anyone wants to FOIA it. And then, so my wife goes home, and she goes inside, and she locks the door, and about 2 minutes later, the police show up. And there was false allegations that my wife had kidnapped somebody, which it was just not true, obviously. And so, but they knew that. So Herner comes up to my door and pounds on it, and he's screaming, "Be a man!" And so then they keep claiming they want to make sure the child in the home is safe, right? We want to make sure the child's safe. But then intermittently, when he's talking to the officers, not on the PA, like Rhaegar, for example, says, is there anything to substantiate this child is in danger? And Herner scoffs, actually, and says, no, she's fine. So he knows there's no real issue. And then he even tells all the officers outside that it's not illegal to be an asshole. So he just says he's done nothing wrong other than be an asshole. But they're outside my house. They're beating on the door. They're flicking the lights. They're flicking like the siren.
And they're over the speaker, the loudspeaker.
They're on the PA, and they're just harassing me. And by the way, in the body cam I got, you can read Herner's text messages, and they're all on overtime. So there's 5 officers at my house on overtime harassing my wife because of a person that has a PPO against them who should have been arrested because that person followed my wife home.
Who was it that followed you home? Your ex-wife?
Ex-wife, right,
okay.
Right. Yeah, Dan Jensen Jr.'s wife, right.
Okay.
So, these are the things that we're dealing with, and they don't care, obviously, about me or any crime that was committed against me. They're just trying to appease, my opinion, Dan Jensen Sr. That's what this is all about. They're trying to help Dan Jensen Sr., and his primary goal is to try to ruin the appearance of my suitability as a parent. Mm-hmm. That is, in a nutshell, what's going on.
And then they just casually left. You guys never came out.
Right. After I called them and I tried to discuss what was happening, and then Herner just wasn't making any sense, so I hung up on him. And then after I hung up on him, he just said, "Screw this, we're leaving." And
I remember, I don't recall exactly what he said at the end.
Oh, right.
But he said something along the lines of...
Yeah, I really must have gotten under his skin because he said while his body cam was running,
yes,
he's fair game for anything and everything.
Which, when I heard that, I was like, wow. Scary. Well, it's scary because they think they're untouchable, right?
Right.
You have a body cam footage that is recording everything you're doing, everything you're saying, and you don't care.
And to make that even worse, I filed a police report against Herner.
Mm-hmm. What happened there?
I said that he said I was fair game for anything and everything.
I would have took that as a death threat.
That's exactly how I took it.
That's exactly, I mean, I would have.
So what then happened was I was charged with filing a false police report.
What?
Yep, because it is right in the, I believe Tim Matouk was the investigator on that one also. See, Tim Matouk is all throughout my, the discovery file as the investigator on my case.
For?
My cases, for the stalking charges, and
at the Wayne County Prosecutor's office.
Wayne County Prosecutor's office, right. So what he did was they claimed that wasn't true, even though I had the body cam. They claimed it was not true. He did not say that, and that he did not threaten me. But he did threaten me in a number of ways, and just for the sake of this, I'm trying to streamline it. He was threatening me out in front of the house, saying they were going to knock the door down if we didn't answer the door.
Yeah.
So I was charged with filing a false police report, and then what really disappointed me was Chip Birschbeck, the judge, Grosse Pointe Farms, who I really like Chip. He's been very reasonable over the years. He spoke on my behalf at a city council meeting in Grosse Pointe Park when the hospital was going to give me that free house, and he was there on behalf of the Historical Society. So we get along, long story short, Chip and I do. But Chip, he certified that he is biased against me. Or he's biased, not necessarily against me, certified that he's biased, and therefore he cannot preside over my case. So the state court administrator's office, Scale, assigned my case somewhere else, to 36th District for this filing false police report case.
Which is where?
Which is Detroit.
Okay.
But then, even though Mr. Birschbeck certified that he's biased, he then signed the search warrant for the phone records related to this incident. So, I wonder who's going to hold Mr. Birschbeck accountable. As much as I like him, he needs to follow the rules just like I have to follow the rules. Mm-hmm. And what he did was a violation of his, the violation of the rules of judicial conduct.
Yeah.
I believe that's what they call it.
And I even think it's more concerning, which I told you when we originally spoke on the phone, the Tim Matouk being on this case is also concerning from the aspect that him and Jensen and Tim Matouk is friends with a lot of the Grosse Pointe Woods, Grosse Pointe Farms police officers. So then people are wondering, well, how does corruption happen? This is exactly how it happens.
Yeah.
You start off at a low-level position, right? It could be a basic officer, right? And you slowly work yourself up. You make these connections within the community, within your workforce, and then all of a sudden you're now splitting up in different departments. You're in different cities. You're in different counties.
Correct.
And now, okay. Your hands in everyone's pocket. Exactly.
So, what's interesting about the prosecutor's office is that they seem to be very receptive to anything that the police say, which you would expect that it's a working relationship, but there's supposed to be some distance where they're both autonomous. So what's interesting about my case for these stalking charges is there was a screenshot, and the screenshot has an anomaly, a significant anomaly.
You showed me it does.
Yes. So it's from an iPhone, and the timestamp from my phone calls is missing. It's blank. And I've never seen that on an iPhone, and I'm actually, very experienced with technology. And it's been edited with the iPhone markup software is exactly what happened. So even though it's clearly Photoshop, I use the term Photoshop, though it's clearly edited, I raised that issue in 2019, and Police Chief John Elkhorn didn't care. None of them had anyone look at it. Nobody cared. They wouldn't even discuss it. Now, they wrote an 18-page motion to revoke my bond that included that screenshot, but they couldn't be bothered to just email me the original file so I could have it examined by a forensic expert. So I just found it interesting that there's these charges pending for 5 years, and Tim Matouk can't figure it out, and Sarah DeYoung and Josh Holcomb can't figure it out.
And this is all because your ex-wife has a PPO on you, or she's telling everybody you're stalking her. And like you had said to me, you go, yeah, I called that many times, but it was because that was the scheduled time I was supposed to speak with our child, and she
Exactly.
was not answering the phone.
Right. There's a time when I can speak to my child, and I don't know if the ringer's off. I don't know if the phone's malfunctioning. All I know is my daughter is, I can't get a hold of her when I'm supposed to be at a very specific time. I'm supposed to be able to get a hold of her. So,
I think it'd be different if you were contacting out of hours, if it were a day that you were not supposed to be communicating.
exactly.
This was a designated time that you were supposed to be calling. The call was expected. Yes, you called a multitude of times. Like you said, you were concerned. You're like, what's going on? This is the time I'm supposed to be speaking.
Right, and I think that's why the time was changed, because at the time the judge said if you call 1 minute outside of this window, you're going to jail, which fortunately for me, I never did call outside of that window. But they tried to just falsify the time that I had called. And what really bothered me is after 4.5 years of begging the prosecutors for this file, I basically had to make a promise that, it was this is what I'm requesting. I want that screenshot, and in exchange for that screenshot, I will settle my end of the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the deal I'm trying to make with the prosecutor. Like there's all this litigation going back and forth. I'll settle mine if you give me that
You
screenshot.
give me what I want, and I'll give you what you want.
Right.
And what they wanted was for you to settle for stalking.
They wanted me. Well, they wanted me to. I mean, there's a lot of things they wanted, but this was at the very end when the case was right before it got dismissed. So what they ended up doing was, I told them like this is what I'm willing to do. And I'm being vague here on
Yeah.
purpose, um, but long story short, I said this is what I'm willing to do if you send me that screenshot. Now they didn't promise me. I wasn't promised anything, and I didn't promise them anything. I just said that this is what I'm willing to do, and then they sent it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that needs to be investigated by the Attorney Grievance Commission or the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, to be honest, because the facts are on my side in this respect. 5 years, and they finally emailed me that call log on a very specific day when those charges were dismissed. And I feel like that itself shows that they were playing hide the ball. So
Mm-hmm.
they're thinking like, well, forget about Brady requirements, which is to provide all exculpatory evidence. That's not important to Sarah DeYoung or Josh Holcomb. What's important to them is trying to get convictions or dragging someone through the legal system for years. And
Well, that's what they do. They drag you through the legal system. They want to make you go broke. They want to make you have nothing. And then they take everything from you.
Right, that's what they did. And I took a page out of Robert Durst's book. I was trying to find an attorney, and I said, you know what, I'll just hire both of them because I wanted to be represented, and I'm not going to admit to something that I didn't do.
Agreed.
So I hired two very good attorneys, and they did a really good job for me. But there's only so much you can do when the police are lying and the prosecutor is engaging in improper conduct like this.
Yeah, and I think I want to go back a second just to the phone records, because that is a huge issue within JoAnn's case as well. People are probably wondering, like, kind of, we're going off on another case. Yeah, but we're building this character and witness for how Grosse Pointe Farms and Grosse Pointe Woods and these cities work when
Sure.
it comes to crimes, right?
Yes.
And there was a lot of discrepancies within the timeline for JoAnn's case specifically, where the Coast Guard was called hours before reporting a person missing, and they rushed right over to Canada, and then even down to that night when she left the church, and then they showed up at the residence to inform them that she was missing. Timeline seems to be an issue through JoAnn's case, but also your case as well.
Sure.
And that's a huge evidence point piece that should be spot on no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I found, what I found interesting was we were able to get some phone records in my case too, in the filing a false police report case.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to take a gander at Sergeant Herner's phone records.
Okay.
And And it's really disappointing what I saw in his phone records, because what happens is they know when they're being recorded. So Herner is really intentional about when he turns his body cam on, when he turns his body cam off. And another thing they do is when they have their official communications, what they do after is once they get off the dispatch line, they immediately pick up their cell phones and call each other.
Of course.
And that's when the real business is being done.
Yep. We've also, through JoAnn's case, examined police reports alongside of phone records. And we're seeing, okay, this is when they're working. This is when they're off the clock, but they're all still contacting each other.
Right.
But claim they have no relationship outside of just a, coworker to coworker type of relationship.
Yeah, I can tell you that is absolutely not true. Herner is contacting, they're exchanging memes and text messages, and there's a lot of communications going on outside of business hours.
Which is scary. I mean, it's okay to be friends with your coworkers, but there has to be a line in the sand at some point, right? Where if you're communicating with each other, is it about work? Is it about what's going on at work? And then when you hold this, like I said, this position of power, it's like this gray area of when you're allowed to communicate, what you're allowed to communicate about. And then it just makes you wonder, right?
Right.
And I want to go back too for a second, because I'm still so shocked that Tim Matouk is on. I mean, I'm not shocked, obviously, but I'm also shocked at the same time. What was his job with investigating? Because the last time I spoke with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, I spoke with Maria Miller.
Sure.
Not sure if you're familiar with who she is. She is the assistant prosecutor underneath Kim Worthy.
Okay.
And her exact verbatim was, it's not the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office job to investigate.
Yeah.
It's the police's job to investigate, and then they basically tie it up in a box with a nice pretty bow, and then they present it. And then from there, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office decides if charges are worth, if there's anything there, their legal team.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that in the podcast when that was mentioned. And my understanding is that is true. So the police must refer the charges or request an outside agency. There's like jurisdictional issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's a concept called home rule. So these are all things that probably need to be reevaluated by our society if they still make sense. But the Wayne County prosecutor investigator, his job is to take the information provided by the police and then, I guess, tie up loose ends necessary for prosecutorial purposes. So it's not a broad investigation. It's simply going through what's been provided to them and find out if anything's missing and what exactly is missing. But I'll tell you, his inability to address a very obviously altered screenshot kind of says it all to me. That he's basically rubber stamping whatever's coming before his desk, to help the Jensens in my instance, and it sounds like on the Romain's instance as well.
Yeah, and it's worth saying too that Dan Jensen was senior this past summer, was just honored for his achievable career as a chief.
Ugh.
And for those of you that follow the podcast, we had billboards and planes and everything out that day. But what was worth noting was the energy that was inside of that event. I was obviously not present, but as lovely as all of their listeners are, they love to give us information.
Sure.
And send us photos and videos. The communications between Bill and Tim and Jensen at that event, and the buddy type mentality, and obviously Bill Matouk owns Woods Wine, and then that liquor, one of the girls there had mentioned that it was provided for this event, and then you start really thinking, you're like, okay,
right,
like how in bed are all of these gentlemen with each other?
And you may have noticed that normally when you go to an event at the Fort House, there's 2 or 3 or 4 Grosse Pointe Farms police cars there. So I actually had gone to the city council and I complained, and Councilman Galuli seemed to be the most receptive to my complaint, which was, why is Grosse Pointe Farms providing free traffic services to the wealthiest Grosse Pointe resident in his family's venue? Why can't he pay for that, or why can't they get a private security? I mean, is this bid? Is there a bid process? What is he paying? So
well, I mean, you are a resident of this area. You are allowed to ask that question. You want to see where funds are being allocated to.
So, what they did, right, and it's such a disgrace, because what they did was, it sounds like there's a little bit of heat for that. So all the marked cars were gone, and all the officers in uniform were gone, and instead they just had one of the Grosse Pointe Farms unmarked vehicles parked at the intersection with the officer inside of his car. So there's still, that's what's crazy.
Oh my God! So they've got
still doing it.
But they had 4 at the Ford House, right? And how many Grosse Pointe Farms police officer vehicles are there? Jokingly, somebody had said, I think there's less than 8 or 10, through the whole area. And I'm like, wait, 5 or 6 is in one spot? And they're like, yeah, you can't walk down the street here if you don't look like you're from here without getting stopped.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and it's in St. Clair Shores nonetheless. So it's really, it just shows that, it's not equal for everybody in Grosse Pointe.
Mm-hmm.
If you're friends with the administration, or if you're married to them, or otherwise have a good relationship with them, or probably if you have something to offer them, like security contracts, stuff like private security contracts, then I'm sure it's easier to get them to give you free things that we're paying for, like security, like traffic services.
Yeah, but it's just the connection that they all have, right?
Right.
Well, that's what they try to deny that they have.
And that's the part. It's like, okay, you can say you don't have you're not connected to this person other than working.
Right.
Why are you calling them after hours on your personal cell phone? Why are you speaking to them all hours of the evening? And it comes back to, they drink together, they hang out together, they smoke cigars together. This is very well known through this community. It's not.
Sure, and
it's not at all.
And I think this is on the lighter side of Daniel Jensen Sr.'s crimes, but he built an entire garage that required a variance, and he had that thing 3/4 built, and he was at city council for a variance without having pulled any permits. And as a contractor, I know that you just can't get away with stuff like that without getting caught. But his house is on the main thoroughfare to get to the city offices. So just the way the entire city administration is so accommodating of him not following the same rules as everybody else is really, really disturbing.
And then for you, it ties back into the fact that this large person in charge son is married to your ex-wife, and then you're like, hey, I'm just a dad that wants custody. I want to be a part. I want to be
equal part of my daughter's life.
Yeah.
And and then I've got, so that's all I want to do. I love my family, and I'll do anything for them, and I will never give up or quit. But I'm going against things like Dan Jensen Sr. stealing from Grosse Pointe Farms, and I was able to prove this which further bothers me about how the Romain family is trying to get FOIAs, and they have to sue for them. Whereas, I filed a FOIA on a Friday at 4:00 one day, and on Monday morning, Dan Jensen Sr. was at court with my FOIA in his hand, trying to show it to the judge. It was like a tattletale thing. I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish from that, but it was basically meaningless. But the part that bothered me was, where did he get that so quickly? And we all know the answer. He just took it from the city. But that's a crime. If you want documents from the city, you have to go through the process. You have to pay the fee like I do. There's a delay. It has to be approved by the city attorney. So the way I see it, and the way the federal government sees it, is he either stole the use of his time and the city equipment to print that paper to make a copy of it, or as a civilian, he illegally accessed city computers.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say too, through this podcast, they'll say, oh, almost like we're being nitpicky. And I'm like, no, because at the end of the day, all of these small things lead to something larger, right?
Right.
Running a lien on somebody is very illegal.
Very.
Unless you are intentionally pulling that person over or needing to run it using the lien system. And this is not the first instance where I've heard, outside of JoAnn's story and your story, that they've ran the lien on people
Right.
that they've had issues with.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, I think that it's, there's all these small crimes that occur on a day-to-day basis. Oh, here's another one. Dan Jensen Sr., the chief of police, pulled my wife over 2 days after she got a PPO against his son. So he sought her out and he pulled her over. What he didn't count on was I was in the car at the same time. And he made some comment of, look who we have here. But then he couldn't write us the ticket. I think he knew how bad it would have looked. So he called the other officer. I forget his name, but he lives on Terrain, I believe. And, this is a Grosse Pointe officer. And the officer perjured himself in court, claiming he saw it. And the city attorney blocked all attempts by me to get the GPS coordinates, to get the body cam. So.
And look what you have to go to defend yourself. It's
right.
Crazy. One little instance like that where, it's like this badge is an intimidation thing for them, right?
Right.
You drive in this area, and I've even thought about it, because I'm not from here, but I come here often now to work on this and work on JoAnn's story and meet with people in the community. And I think about it, and I'm like, I wonder, what they've done, what they know, what they...
Yeah.
And I just assume, right? I tell everybody, I assume they know everything about me.
Oh, I'm sure
they know everything. Yep. I would love to see my lien page. Maybe I should go FOIA that tomorrow and see if I can.
Yeah. So you know why I'm so vocal about this? I made a point. Some people would perceive this as embarrassing, but I'm really proud to say now that all the charges against me were dropped related to stalking.
No, that is something to be proud of, because
what wasn't true, but
fight for a long time.
Yeah.
So another reason I'm really proud of this is Dan Jensen Sr. had his his left-hand man, the chief of police, current chief of police, John Hutchins. I always forget, but he had Hutchins request from City Council approval to appoint Dan Jensen Sr. as the police commissioner of Grosse Pointe Farm. So that's like
so he can stay on payroll?
Yes. It's all about payroll.
And then he can still get his pension, right?
Yeah, he's stacking. He probably has 2 pensions, chief of police and as an officer. And then now he's going to have a third income. And but guess what? He didn't get it. I think that the city council was sick of him. They're sick of all this like messiness surrounding his name. Well,
it's messy. I mean, it's big messy. And I'll share with you guys too if you want.
Sure.
If you guys want the videos of Jensen's depositions for JoAnn's.
Oh, sure.
Because I think that says a lot about character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how you carry yourself, right? I post them on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and it's just really so that JoAnn's case, obviously being 15 years old, people will go back on the internet and they'll just type in JoAnn Matouk Romain. And I'm just hoping that being on YouTube will spark them back to the podcast, and they'll be able to see the entire story for what it is. But the biggest thing are the comments under that, and people saying, I cannot believe this is the chief of police. I cannot believe this is how this person carries themselves. I cannot believe that they speak that way.
He doesn't know how to act.
And that's the thing. If you're so willing to do that, it's like, you're never going to be in trouble for the things that you're doing. So this is where social media will be your best friend, right?
Right.
I explain to everybody, they're like, oh my God, you've uncovered so much. I'm like, I really haven't though.
Right.
I've uncovered, yes, some corruption, which everybody basically knew.
Right.
But when you create a platform and you put it all in one place and you say, here you go, people.
Right.
Here it is. And then people can see it. They can hear it with their own eyes. And they're like, whoa, this is actually happening in real time. People are watching real time corruption happening.
Right.
it's almost like a shock for people outside of this area, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just like the Romain case. I mean, I just remember that my friend Johnny Jagger would not shut up about rocks getting sucked up into the jet skis because it was so shallow in that location.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought that so if you're not from here, you don't realize how ludicrous that was. The fact that she supposedly walked, like, I don't know, 200-300 yards or some crazy
Football field.
distance in leather stilettos. It's just absurd.
In winter.
And that nobody would notice that somebody, they're claiming, only, police are claiming she was sitting there, but there were other instances of eyewitnesses in the area that saw other weird things happening.
Right.
That didn't come down to her being at the water's edge.
Yeah.
Right? Vehicles speeding and
an
unmarked car pulled and backed in, a car alarm going off. Like, there were other instances that were odd.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of people that I've talked to say, like, oh, you think there's some big conspiracy? And what I like to point people towards is there's a case in Pennsylvania called the Kids for Cash case.
Okay.
And what it was is two judges were basically business partners on a private jail, and they saw to it that jail for children stayed full. And that way they benefited financially from it. And when the state came out with a report, once the judges went to jail, and they said that the real crime was that up to 200 people were accomplices because of their silence. The defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the public defenders, the court staff, all these people knew what was happening, and not a single one reported it. And that's the kind of system we have right now. Like right now in Oakland County, there's that judge that said all those racist things.
Oh, disgusting.
And it was submitted to the chief judge, and nothing happened.
And that's the biggest thing I say on the podcast. See something, say something.
Right.
You can always come forward and be anonymous. I feel like I always try to protect people's identity if they're not wanting to speak open and freely. And justice has no expiration date.
Right.
So
never give up. I really feel like the JoAnn's case is going to be solved eventually because there's so many people that have little pieces of the puzzle, and some of them don't know it, and some of them will become disillusioned with the police department or ex-wives of police officers. So I really feel like, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious that something happened. A couple of our friends work at the Coast Guard, and they just say this is ridiculous that this kind of response time would happen. And growing up in Grosse Pointe, I know that if you park a vehicle at St. Paul, nobody cares for at least a day, 2 days.
I mean, me just being here, I see how St. Paul's is like a focal point for this community. I mean, for one, the church is beautiful. It's on the water. There are always cars parked there.
Always.
Correct.
And there's constantly people walking across. I mean, being here, I'm like, holy cow, like there's a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it says a lot too, you growing up in this community saying, listen, her going into the water there is not
even remotely possible. And I really want to be an example for everybody. So even though all this stuff is very messy and, it sometimes feels like it'd be easier to stay quiet. So that way it doesn't have this like sense of feeling embarrassed because people like think a certain way about you. But, I think taking the opposite approach is better. Stand up to the situation and, not be afraid to say what's going on. And people respect you more for that. Speak
your truth, right?
Absolutely.
Truth is power. Our words are power.
Yep. And I'll never shut up.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I'm glad out of all the people that sent me your information, they're like, this is the guy you got to talk to. Everybody would just send me like, this is who you got to.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep the videos coming because I'm sure Dan Jensen Sr. is not done acting a fool. And I know that, and I'm really hoping that we get some, a solid police department.
Yeah,
like Chief Heller was great, and
people deserve that. And that's the thing people don't understand. We are paying their salaries.
Yeah, right.
Your tax dollars are paying their salaries. If you're not happy with something, you are allowed to speak your mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Go
It
to
shouldn't be
your
a bad thing.
exactly.
It shouldn't be a problem. It should just be like, oh, let me help them figure it out.
Yes.
Mhm.
But I'm really hoping that the city administration, and especially Dickinson Wright, I'm hoping they take a more active role in honoring their responsibilities
Mm-hmm.
as they're an appointed prosecutor. Dickinson Wright is the prosecutor for Grosse Pointe Farms for all misdemeanors, and they have a responsibility to make sure that the law is being followed. And I think that they have a huge liability if they don't.
Agreed.
And that's our intent. Is we intend to bring a case against the city of Grosse Pointe Farms and Dickinson Wright, and we'll just let the chips fall wherever they fall.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and good luck with
Thank you.
everything.
It was so nice talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.